Let's see which battery runs out first, camera, microphone, or mine. Hey everyone, let's wrap up December. I have a lot of books to talk about, so let's get rid of the non-bookish videos first. And one was my goals video, my review of 2022 goals and what I plan for 2023. Thanks for sharing your goals and all the comments, and if you haven't seen it, links are in the description. Just as well as for my letter to December, which was short, and I hope to get better at doing them again next year. But we will see how energy levels go. Hopefully up, but who knows. Now, on to the books. Like I said, I read a lot of books, most of it because I had the second half of December off and was on vacation. I talked about a huge number of those books already in 2 vlogs. So let's sort the wrap up by the books I talked about and the vlogs I talked about them in, and then the books I haven't talked about so far. I'm going to talk less about the books I already talked in detail about in vlogs because otherwise this video is going to be too long. So in the first vlog I uploaded this month, I finished 3 books. The Final Empire is the first book in the Mistborn series, and I really enjoyed this book. As it's the first in a series, we get a lot of world building. We find out how the world is constructed, the society in there, and the different levels in society, positions, and also the magic system that is working on this world. Highly interesting. I really enjoyed the world building and also the story, which I still don't know if it's a con or a heist, where they want to overthrow the ruler of this world and basically start a revolution and also steal something. But this is what they're planning. A lot of it felt like planning the heist and then working on it, and then of course with every heist story things go wrong. And I really enjoyed it. Can't wait to continue with the series, but the books are rather long, so let's see how fast that will go. Then I listened also to 2 audiobooks in that vlog. I finished In the Shadow of the Banyan, and that is following a young girl through the revolution, or what was it called, in Cambodia in the 1970s. And it is really heartbreaking to see what happened to the people there, and also how the revolutionaries treated the intellectuals and the ruling party, and everything that is told from the view of the 7-year-old girl as she grows a few years older over the course of the book. And I kind of feel bad about saying I enjoyed it. I think it was really well done, and it gave me an insight into what was going on there, a part of history I didn't know about, and also the way it was told was very beautiful, despite there being some rather gruesome and despicable things happening. Since that was so exhausting, afterwards I listened to The Housekeeper and the Professor, or The Professor and the Housekeeper. I can never remember which way around. Anyways, this is a very light-hearted story about an old professor who had an accident and then his memory stopped working properly, so he has no short-term memory anymore. And then he gets a housekeeper and she has a son, and how they interact, form a friendship, and it's about baseball, friendship, and the math a lot, because the professor was a math professor. So that was very enjoyable, and that was the first vlog done. The second vlog was from my first week of vacation. I thought to start off my vacation it would be a nice idea to try these read a book a day things, and I failed and not failed. I mainly failed because I didn't plan it out properly, and I had meant to read shorter books, but I didn't really set out defining what a day is for me, and I flew through some of those books so fast that I ended up finishing 11 things: audiobooks, short story collections, novellas, things like that. And I enjoyed this experiment, but because of that I talked about all the next 11 things in that video already. Even though I knew the end is a murder mystery where we start off unsuspectingly following a young detective trying to take pictures of a murder scene, of a crime scene, and then follow along. The story unravels and it's very fascinating. It contains magic, it contains angels, and a lot of mysteries going on, a lot of family and things. Aside from the murder mystery, there's also the part that our detective is a lesbian, and we see a bit of how things are in 1940s Chicago, and how she and her lover try to hide that, and what they do to be able to live properly. I don't think that sounds right, but anyways, this book was highly enjoyable. I did have some troubles with the writing, but the story itself I really recommend. That's why I recommend sampling the writing, because I struggled with the writing to the end, but I enjoyed the story so much that made up for that. In that week, I also finished listening to Terry Pratchett Alive with Footnotes, which is about 16 hours, so it took me the whole week, but I finished it in that week, so it counts. And I really enjoyed listening to the biography written by his personal assistant. There was a lot of information that I didn't know. To be honest, I didn't know much about his private life, working life, or anything. I mainly read the books and enjoy those. The biography covers his life and his career, the good parts, the bad parts, and also the sick parts and the final years. So in the beginning, it's much more interesting and informational and entertaining. In the end, it gets sad, and yeah, you find yourself grieving a little bit. But that was okay. In physical form, I read a collection of 2 novellas that were translated from English to German because I thought the author was writing in German, but yeah, I messed that up. The first story, The Things I Think About When I'm Smiling Politely, something like that, is 10 chapters counting down the breakup or the divorce and separation from the narrator to her husband and how things evolved. It is sort of interesting. I liked the way it was told. I liked the representation of being in Berlin and coming to Berlin. I also thought we learned a lot about the characters, even though we only see things through the narrator's eye. And I found it also very fitting, let's say it like that we see the inside of her head. We see her own perspective, and also where she's sometimes perceiving herself wrong and reacting to others and the things we don't say, but we think. And for that, I think it was very good. The separation part, the story part, it wasn't that much for the plot, but it was a good read. The second story, Synchronicity, is more of an advent calendar, 24 parts of a story of a young woman losing her colors. So every day she loses another color that she sees, and at some point she gets those colors back, and how that changes her perspective, her life, and also some part of this imaginary culture or people that she comes from and how they live. Very interesting. I enjoyed the second story much, much more. Since they are all translated from English, you can also read them in English. Then I read The Double Bass, which I thought was a novella, but turned out it's a one-man play where you have this one man talking to the audience. He's a double bass player, and he starts off sounding like mansplaining and a snob, telling you about music history, about the place of the double bass in the orchestra, and the more the story progresses or the play progresses, the more drunk he gets, the more aggressive he gets, and the more annoying. I think this is much more fun when you see it instead of reading it, because he was so annoying that at parts I was like, oh, but it's just less than 100 pages and I read it in German, so I flew through it in a matter of hours. Then I read a couple of short stories for the Dominion of the Fallen series, which were bought in 2 separate things, a short story collection and 1 short story on its own. I highly enjoyed this. There were short stories. I never really know what to do with short stories. I tend to forget them very fast, but I enjoy reading them at the moment, and it was revisiting the world of the Dominion of the Fallen series and also some of the characters, so that was nice. Treacle Walker surprised me a lot. I didn't expect to fall in love with this book. I cannot sum up, I cannot say properly what it is about, but I flew through it. I hadn't planned to or expected to read it in one sitting, but I couldn't put it down. I was dragged into the writing. This is the kind of writing I really enjoy, where it pulls you in. And even though you really have no idea what's going on most of the time, or you cannot sum up the story neatly and nicely and tie it up with a bow, but there are just things happening, and I had to look up a lot of words, I admit that. Should have bought it as an ebook so that I can just press a page and look up the words easily. Anyways, love it. Psyche in a Dress was a novella written in verse, and it was more or less following this young woman in abusive relationships, let's say like that, between her parents and lovers and things like that. I cannot really properly sum up the story because I'm not completely sure I fully understood it. The stories are connected or referencing Greek myth characters. I know enough of Greek myth to superficially follow what's going on, but not enough to deeply know if I actually comprehended all of the story. And there was a little bit more violence or abusive relationships than I would have liked, but I didn't know that going into it, as I usually don't. As it was written in verse form, it was very, very easy to read. So flew through that as well. After all that abusiveness, I needed something cozy, so I went for the Cybernetic Tea Shop, which turns out to be a lovely science fiction novella in a world where there are no robots anymore, but other creatures that have no self-developing AI, and robots have AI. We follow a young woman who's a technician who can repair the technology and personal assistants they have now with their limited AI, but the new city she moves to, there is still a robot, and she gets interested in her, and so they become friends, and there's a romance going on. There's also a lot of talk about the life in the cafe and life for the robot after her first owner left, and how the situation or the people don't really want her to be there anymore. It's a cozy story. It was really nice. Then I read The Gold Diggers, which is not a cozy story again. I had an up and down in that week, but it was very, very interesting and super well written. This book is set in Zimbabwe or South Africa, and it's following illegal migrants from Zimbabwe to South Africa. I think it was about 2008, following an economic crisis in Zimbabwe where people just lost their incomes, and I think the government fell apart. I'm not completely sure on the details about what exactly happened in Zimbabwe, but there were a lot of economic refugees that fled the country, and they migrated legally to South Africa, to Johannesburg. We're following a set of characters crossing the border, what happened while crossing and what happened afterwards. We also learn a lot about why they migrated and their life before and their life after. The book came with an introduction, and the introduction I would definitely read afterwards because it's spoiling part of the stories, and explained how the different characters are meant as types of migrants. And you could really feel that. You could feel that there was a lot of research done. You could feel that a lot of the migrant stories were not happy stories. There was a lot of violence. There's rape. You need to be aware of that. Overall, I really found the book was very authentic. It was heartwarming, or it was heartbreaking more, but the writing just kept you going. So really good. Can recommend it. Of course, I needed something more lighthearted again afterwards, and I thought that the third book in the Before the Coffee Gets Cold series, Before the Memory Fades, was out, and so I read that. We follow again different time travelers who go back from this cafe to the past to meet former people, let's say that. It's in the series, we're in a different cafe, but the rules are the same. You have to sit in a certain spot in the cafe, and then you can travel back in time in that certain cafe and meet people who have been at that cafe at that time. In this book, we follow 4 characters, or we have 4 chapters time traveling, and each of the characters are having a hard time, really struggling with life, and they are suicidal parts, and how this time travel affects the perspective and or life they have. That is really badly summarized. Anyways, if you read the first 2 books, you know and understand this, how it works. It's very repetitive, again, just like the first ones, but the writing is very cozy and calming, and I find that being in this cafe and feeling this surrounding and really warm friendship and companionship with all the characters is really nice. All right, that were all the books that were talked about in the second log. Now we're entering the books, or the area of books that I haven't talked about before. So let's see how long that takes and how much I can tell you about them, because I'm starting to forget a lot lately. So let's start with We Have Always Been Here. I listened to this on audiobook, and the book starts off with life in Pakistan. God, I'm not even sure. I think Pakistan. And then the migration to Canada, how migrating to Canada was, then finding identity and things. What I really enjoyed about this book was that it gave me a lot of insight into something that I hadn't even known about and thought about. What I didn't do was dive deeper and do research into this. Especially what I'm talking about is the political situation in Pakistan at that time. There were religious outcasts. I'm not exactly sure on the terminology. That's why I'm struggling here. But the sect that they belong to is not one of the popular sects, and they had to flee the country because of that. And in Canada, of course, they were Pakistani immigrants, so they were other, and the experience of immigrants there. Then as the author grows older, there's also a lot about relationship defining or finding identity, defining love for themselves, and also discovering their queerness, and then discovering their relationship to their religion and rediscovering it as a queer person, and then also finding a profession around this identity. So I found this rather interesting in the way that people can find their own identity and redefine and reorganize and restructure their life, and it takes multiple years and multiple relationships, and I thought that was very well done. I also enjoyed the audiobook very much. It was very good to listen to and really enjoyable. After that, I listened to James Moriarty, Criminal Consultant, which is more or less a short story collection in the lines of Sherlock Holmes, but on the criminal side. It was entertaining, short-lived, easy to listen to. I'll probably won't be able to summarize any of the stories, but I highly enjoyed the audiobook. I think it was just 1 hour, let's be honest. Nothing much to remember. The last audiobook I listened to in December was The Day of the Triffids, and this didn't turn out to be the book I expected. I always thought The Day of the Triffids was an alien invasion story, but it turned out to be more of an apocalyptic story, or an apocalypse story, something like that. The book starts off with this man waking up in the hospital. He had his eyes blindfolded because he had an accident, and today is the day the bandages were supposed to get off. And the day before that, there were comets in the sky, and he couldn't see them, of course, because he had bandages, but everybody was raving about how great that looked. But it turns out that those comets, or whatever the lights in the sky were, made everyone blind. So the world is rather quiet, and he tries to get out of his bed and find his way around, and finds that everyone he encounters is blind. So that was a rather interesting start to a novel. But then I got hit by a huge wave of ableism, because the few of the characters that he meets are very capable and coping well. There are quite a few who have killed themselves just for waking up blind, and that struck me as rather off. I don't know if that was less off in the 1950s when that was written. I'm not completely sure. So I started off the book wondering if this is still up to date or current, or if we really need to listen to this story anymore, wondering what I will get. Most of the book follows this character. He explains a little bit about his life before the event, and then what happens. We see how the seeing are treating the blind differently and are going about things differently. The ableism wears off a little bit the more I listen to it, but it never really got away that feeling that being blind is not being a useful member of society and civilization. There were some different aspects to it, but overall it kept being the base work or the groundwork that being blind was such an inhibitor, disablement, that you couldn't really function well, which is also mentioned a lot with the Triffids. Yes, there are Triffids and they are a plant, but they are not from alien invasion or from outer space. They were grown probably in Russia, nobody knows, but that's where the seed comes from. And even though they were a highly valued plant in the beginning, turns out they have much more deeper capabilities. They can walk around, they have some stingers that they can fire and that are poisoned, and then they can kill the people. And part of the superiority the Triffids will have over human beings is that they are much better adapted at living in a world without seeing. So there goes the ableism. Another part that struck me as really, really off was when they called women, or this one party that was talking about what they are going to do next and how to rebuild society, was basically looking at blind men are useless, women are there to make babies, and multiple partners are necessary. So that was the second thing where I was like, ooh. But that also got a little bit less single-minded as we get more and more ideas of rebuilding society. And that, I think, was actually the strength of the novel, where there are different ideas and different parties presented on how to rebuild society, how to start civilization again, the thoughts of going around what to do next. And this goes on for a few years until the audiobook ends or the novel ends. And there are quite some interesting ideas that I think are still valuable. And I also really, really liked how they pointed out in one part or in one conversation that it is not easy to rebuild and have the mental capacity to learn and research stuff because they're so busy with staying alive. And that is something which I really, really liked, because they pointed out, yes, we have the resources to learn everything and to research what we can do about the Triffids, because after a while the Triffids are the biggest danger they have, apart from not knowing how to make food and stuff. So that was rather interesting and I enjoyed that. I finished also one last book, and that was a reread of The Night Circus. The Night Circus, if you don't know, is this book where we have the night circus, which is only black and white, and it is the venue for a magical duel between two ideas of how magic is used. And it takes place over multiple years, and about the magic contest, about the friendships and relationships between the multiple characters, and I highly enjoyed it. I love it. There's somewhere a full review up when I read it first. And that's it. All the batteries lasted, but daylight is fading. So let's see if I can read my yearly stats, because for the year I managed to read 119 books that were in total 15,152 pages and 23,329 minutes. So not so bad, I think. I'm quite happy with my reading this year, as I mentioned in my goals video, which has a little summary of my reading stats. But yes, let's see that. So December is done. The year is done. I have exciting plans for 2023, but first I want to know what you have read in December. If you had such an amazing reading month as I did. Granted, I had 2 weeks vacation, so that's why I read so much. That doesn't happen normally. Anyways, thank you all for watching. Happy New Year to everyone, and let me know how your December went. Bye-bye.